There is a moment that arrives before any real change becomes visible, and it's easy to dismiss it because nothing external has shifted yet. Your life looks the same, your routines still exist, the world hasn't announced anything new, and yet, internally, there's a quiet sense that something is moving. Not urgency, not excitement, just a subtle knowing that the ground beneath you isn't as solid as it used to be. Major changes almost never begin with action. They begin with signals, internal ones. The mind receives information before circumstances rearrange, because the psyche updates faster than reality can. Intuition speaks first, long before logic finds language. That's why this feeling often arrives without explanation. You can't point to evidence, but you also can't shake the sense that you're already in motion. This kind of message doesn't appear to warn you. It appears because the shift has already started, even if your conscious mind hasn't caught up yet. One of the first signs of this internal movement is an unsettling calm. Not peace in the romantic sense, but a quiet where urgency used to live. If your system has been operating in survival mode for a long time, calm can feel strange, even suspicious. You're used to pressure, to striving, to reacting. When that tension drops, it can leave behind a sense of boredom or restlessness that the mind interprets as something being wrong. But often, this calm is the nervous system exiting survival. It no longer needs to keep you alert, driven, or braced in the same way. The constant background noise fades, and in that quiet, you may feel unmotivated, disconnected, or unsure of direction. This doesn't mean you're stagnating. It often means life is preparing to move. Calm replaces urgency right before a breakthrough because the system needs space to reorganize. When life gets quiet, it's usually not ending. It's clearing the stage. As this calm settles in, old patterns begin to lose their authority. Habits that once distracted you don't hit the same way. Emotional triggers that used to hijack your attention feel weaker, almost irrelevant. You're not forcing change. You're simply not convinced by the old loops anymore. Repetition collapses on its own when it stops delivering the emotional payoff it once did. This can feel disorienting because repetition often masquerades as stability. Even unhealthy cycles give the mind a sense of structure. When those cycles break without effort, the mind panics. It wants to restart the pattern just to feel oriented again. But it can't. The old life can't convince you anymore. And that's one of the clearest signs that change is underway. Real change doesn't always announce itself with struggle. Sometimes it shows up as indifference toward what used to run you. Alongside this, identity begins to feel tight, like clothing you've outgrown without realizing it. You may notice a discomfort in continuing to live as the version of yourself that used to fit. Your self-image no longer contains your inner expansion. Roles feel restrictive. Labels feel inaccurate. You might feel the urge to simplify, detach, or withdraw, not because you're regressing, but because the container you're in is too small. This is when people often say they feel off, without knowing why. The truth is, your next identity is already forming beneath the surface, and the current one can't hold it. Major change begins when identity stops feeling like home and starts feeling like limitation. Not because you failed at being who you were, but because you've outgrown it. This identity shift often brings emotional detachment, which is frequently misunderstood as loss. You may care less about things that once consumed you, not because life has lost meaning, but because your grip on it has loosened. Detachment creates space. It allows alignment to emerge without force. There can be a quiet relief in this phase, even if it's mixed with confusion. You're no longer emotionally entangled in every outcome. You're not reacting as automatically. And while this can feel unfamiliar, it's not emptiness. It's perspective. Many people mistake this phase for losing their life, when in reality, they're releasing control over it. You're not disappearing. You're stepping back far enough to see clearly. Then comes the pause, the space where nothing feels clear yet. This is the in-between that the mind hates most. You know something is changing, but you don't know into what. Clarity hasn't arrived. Direction hasn't named itself. And the temptation here is to force answers, to rush into decisions just to escape uncertainty. But clarity rarely arrives before transition. It usually arrives after you've stayed present long enough without demanding resolution. This pause isn't wasted time. It's a psychological threshold, a doorway that requires patience instead of action. When you try to force direction too early, you often recreate the old chapter in a new form. Learning to tolerate uncertainty without panic is part of the transformation itself. The pause isn't the problem. It's the space change needs in order to land cleanly. What makes this phase especially difficult is that it doesn't come with applause or validation. No one may see what's happening inside you. From the outside, it can look like nothing. But internally, your system is reorganizing values, recalibrating limits, and updating priorities. The unconscious often recognizes readiness long before awareness does. That's why messages like this tend to appear at specific stages, not as motivation, not as instruction, but as confirmation. You're not being told to change. You're being shown that change is already in motion. The searching you've been doing begins to soften, replaced by a calm certainty that doesn't need proof. If this resonates now, it's not predicting something that will happen someday. It's acknowledging something that has already begun. The signs aren't dramatic, but they're consistent. Calm replacing urgency. Old patterns losing power. Identity feeling too small. Emotional detachment creating space. A pause that feels uncomfortable, but necessary. These are not random experiences. They are signals that the internal shift is ahead of the external one. Life always moves this way, inside first, then outside. This stage asks for restraint rather than effort, attention rather than action, trust rather than control. Not because nothing is happening, but because something is, and it's still forming. You don't need to chase the next chapter. You don't need to name it yet. You only need to recognize that the old one is no longer running the show. The message isn't here to push you forward. It's here to let you know you're already in transition. And once that's understood, the rest unfolds in its own time. What often becomes clearer in the second half of this process is how much of your life was being driven by momentum rather than intention. Before the shift began, movement itself may have felt like safety. As long as things were happening, as long as you were busy, striving, reacting, adjusting, there was no need to question direction. The internal signals were drowned out by activity. Now that the noise has lowered, you're left with a strange awareness. You can feel movement happening beneath the surface, even though nothing external has changed yet. This can feel unsettling because it removes the illusion that progress is always visible. But internal change has its own rhythm, and it rarely asks for your interference. It asks for your attention. In this quieter state, you may notice that your usual ways of measuring yourself no longer work. Productivity doesn't feel as rewarding. Validation doesn't land the same way. Even future planning can feel hollow, not because you've lost ambition, but because ambition rooted in the old identity no longer fits. This is often when people assume they're regressing, when in reality, they're shedding metrics that no longer reflect who they are. The mind struggles here because it wants continuity. It wants to believe that growth looks like a straight line. But real transitions include moments where forward motion becomes internalized. You are not paused because you're stuck. You're paused because your system is updating the criteria it uses to decide what matters. This is also where intuition begins to speak more clearly, though not in the dramatic way people expect. Intuition at this stage doesn't shout instructions. It doesn't give you a clear image of what's next. Instead, it shows up as a series of quiet refusals. You feel less willing to tolerate certain dynamics, less willing to compromise in familiar ways, less willing to participate in patterns that once felt normal. These refusals are not rebellion. They are alignment forming. The psyche is narrowing its range, not to limit you, but to protect what's emerging. You may not yet know what you're moving toward, but you're becoming very clear about what you're moving away from. And that clarity is enough for now. As the old patterns continue to weaken, the mind may attempt to revive them, especially during moments of uncertainty. You might notice thoughts pulling you back toward familiar worries, familiar distractions, familiar identities. This isn't failure. It's the nervous system checking whether the old strategies are still available. When they no longer generate the same emotional response, the system eventually lets them go. This is how real change stabilizes, not through force, but through irrelevance. The old life doesn't end with a fight. It ends when it stops making sense. When repetition no longer convinces you, the chapter closes on its own. During this phase, emotional detachment can deepen, and with it, a subtle fear that you're becoming disconnected from life itself. But if you look closely, what's actually happening is that your relationship to experience is changing. You're less reactive, less consumed, less pulled into every emotional current. This can feel like loss if intensity was your primary marker of meaning. But meaning doesn't require constant emotional spikes. Often, it requires enough distance to see clearly. Detachment here is not disengagement. It's a shift from being inside every experience to being able to observe it without being overtaken. That shift brings relief, even if it's quiet. Another aspect of this transition is the way time begins to feel different. Urgency fades, and with it, the pressure to arrive somewhere quickly. This can be uncomfortable if you're used to defining yourself by speed or progress. But psychologically, this slowing down is essential. It allows the nervous system to integrate change rather than react to it. Integration is not visible work. It doesn't produce immediate results. But without it, any new direction you choose will be built on the same old foundation. The pause between chapters exists so that when movement resumes, it does so from a more stable place. It's important to understand that this phase is not asking you to withdraw from the world entirely. It's asking you to stop forcing yourself into alignment with things that no longer resonate. There's a difference. Withdrawal motivated by fear closes you off. Withdrawal motivated by truth preserves energy. You may naturally simplify your life during this time. Fewer commitments, fewer explanations, fewer emotional negotiations. This simplification isn't avoidance, it's preparation. Like clearing a field before planting, the psyche reduces complexity so it can support something new without distortion. As the internal shift continues, you may experience moments of quiet confidence that feel unfamiliar because they aren't tied to certainty. You don't know exactly what's coming, but you trust that something is. Not because you've imagined it, but because the old structures are clearly no longer running your life. That trust doesn't need to be justified. It shows up as patience, as restraint, as a willingness to wait without panicking. This is one of the clearest signs that the transition is real. You stop demanding immediate answers because you sense that forcing them would interfere with the process. Eventually, small external changes may begin to appear, but they often feel anticlimactic compared to the internal work that preceded them. Decisions that once felt heavy feel obvious. Endings that once felt terrifying feel natural. New directions emerge quietly, without the drama you expected. That's because the real shift already happened inside you. The external world is simply catching up. When this happens, you may realize that the message you received earlier wasn't pointing you toward change. It was acknowledging it. It arrived because you were already ready to hear it. If you're in this stage now, the most important thing to remember is that nothing has gone wrong. The discomfort you feel is not a sign of confusion. It's a sign of transition. You're not waiting for life to begin. You're already inside a process of becoming. The lack of clarity is not a mistake. It's a feature. It prevents you from rushing into a future built from the past. It keeps the space open long enough for something more accurate to form. This phase doesn't ask you to act. It asks you to notice, to observe what no longer holds your attention, to respect the calm without trying to fill it, to allow the old chapter to remain closed even if the new one hasn't announced itself yet. Change doesn't always come with instructions. Sometimes it comes with silence, with subtle signals, with a feeling that the ground is shifting even though the scenery hasn't changed. And if this message found you now, it isn't predicting what will happen next. It's confirming where you already are. In motion. In between. In the quiet part of transformation where nothing looks dramatic, but everything is rearranging itself underneath. You don't need to push. You don't need to decide everything yet. You only need to recognize that the shift is already happening and let it complete itself without interference.